often I see a discussion about EDI against APIs, because EDI is a technology that's been around 40 years, as we've discussed.
Yeah.
API, well, 10 years plus in terms of the world. Is that necessarily the case?
You don't actually need to choose between the two. I think it's, in all things, the right tool for the right job. Some transactions are fine going through traditional EDI, and the complexity is actually simpler doing it that way. Whereas APIs, there's a lot more work to be done up front. It'll vary for every different URL and endpoint and service that you're consuming or producing, and you'd have to manage that. So for example, in the EDI B2B space, most of the transactions are sent via EDI because it's mature, it's reliable, it's cheap, and everybody knows how to do that. Where you can add value for speed is where real-time information, or as close to real-time information, and integration helps you deliver that data faster. So an ASN, for example, could be delivered using an API rather than a batch mode EDI process. Or if you're looking up an inventory, what's my current inventory level right now for something because I want to call off against it? Can I do that? And so some of these things, I think they're complementary to each other, but the right tool for the right job.
Yeah, I'd sort of agree with that in terms of, we had a customer recently, they were re-engineering some of their systems, and we really had to sort of break it down into, okay, which of those processes can stay as batch processes? Because as you say, that's what the job requires. It needs large numbers of files delivered at a particular point in time that's known, and it gets updated. Whereas there are a few processes where you've got to have a real-time status report on it.
That's right.
And those, but there were far fewer of those real-time status reports than there were of the batch. And the cost of, because the route they were going down is they were going to re-engineer all the EDI ones into APIs. But the cost of doing that didn't justify it.
It's very high. Yeah, I think that's a pitfall a lot of people fall into. You've got to be careful about that.
Yeah. So I think that the analysis up front is important.
That helps
before you make that sort of decision. But yeah, they're both. I see them as complementary technologies to each other. But those who are experienced know, and we're talking about organisations here who've got mature systems and processes in the first place. They should think long and hard before trying to re-engineer everything that's in an EDI world into APIs, and vice versa, trying to create APIs for everything that's EDI, because the maths doesn't add up.
It's about scale as well. Every single transaction, an API transaction, I think is computationally more expensive than an EDI transaction. And so being able to batch things together gives you better value at scale. If you're doing 10,000 or 100,000 API calls in a short space of time, it's actually better to send one large batch file and say, here you go, process that in one hit, rather than creating and destroying an API session with every single request.